Gray Hollow stretched under a heavy sky, its dusty streets whispering tales of despair and neglect. Once a thriving community, it now languished in the shadow of an oppressive courthouse that loomed over the town like a vulture waiting to feast on the misfortunes of its inhabitants. The wooden buildings, weathered by time and harsh elements, stood as silent witnesses to the injustices that unfolded within this small enclave, their paint peeled and faded much like the dreams of those who called it home. As Samuel Deacon rode into town, the air felt thick with a sense of foreboding. He could almost hear the echoes of his brother's cries for justice, swallowed by the indifference of those who wore badges and black robes. The sheriff's office sat at the heart of Gray Hollow, a stark reminder of authority twisted into something unrecognizable. It was here that Samuel's brother had been pronounced guilty, condemned by a system that valued power over truth. Dust swirled around Samuel's boots as he dismounted, his resolve hardening with each step toward the courthouse. The townsfolk eyed him warily, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. They knew better than to cross paths with the sheriff or the judge. Yet Samuel had no intention of backing down. He was driven not only by vengeance but by an insatiable thirst for justice that burned within him. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, as if nature herself mourned the loss of innocence that had been so cruelly snuffed out. Samuel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history pressing upon him. He would not let his brother's death fade into obscurity. He would carve the truth into memory, even if it meant scorching Gray Hollow to its very foundation. The day of the execution dawned heavy and gray, casting a pall over Gray Hollow that matched Samuel Deacon's mood. He stood in the crowd, heart pounding, as the noose hung ominously from the gallows, taunting him with its finality. His brother Jacob stood on the platform, a mere shadow of the vibrant young man he once was. The sight of him, pale and trembling yet resolute, ignited a storm of emotions within Samuel, grief entwined with an all-consuming rage. As the sheriff stepped forward to announce the sentence, Samuel felt his insides twist painfully. The words justice and law echoed mockingly in his ears. Justice? How could this ever be deemed just when he knew his brother was innocent? In that moment, every breath felt like a betrayal. He had promised Jacob they would fight together against the injustice that had ensnared him, but now all he could do was watch helplessly as fate tightened its grip. With each tick of the clock, despair seeped deeper into Samuel's bones. Memories flooded his mind, laughter shared over campfires, late-night talks about dreams and ambitions, all replaced now by this harrowing spectacle. As Jacob stared out at the crowd, their eyes met for a brief instant. It was a look filled with unspoken words, a plea for understanding and an apology for what was about to happen. As the rope fell around Jacob's neck and the lever was pulled, time seemed to freeze. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as Samuel's world shattered in that heartbeat. It was not just his brother's life that had been stolen, but also their hopes for a future free from tyranny. The weight of this injustice ignited a fierce determination within him. He would not allow this moment to define them. Fueled by anger and grief, Samuel vowed to unearth the truth behind this travesty and ensure that Jacob's story would not fade into silence. The memory of Jacob's arrest played in Samuel's mind like a haunting specter, clear as the day it happened. It was just weeks prior, under the sweltering sun, when the sheriff and his deputies burst into their small home, accusing Jacob of murder. The weight of the accusation had felt like a boulder crashing down on their family, shattering the peace they had fought so hard to maintain. Samuel remembered how Jacob had stood firm, confusion flickering in his eyes, while the sheriff waved a bloody dagger, an incriminating piece of evidence claimed to have been found at the scene. But Samuel knew better. They had been framed. Even then he sensed the corruption lurking beneath the surface, a network of deceit entwined with the very fabric of Gray Hollow. Days turned into nights as Samuel investigated tirelessly, uncovering whispers of collusion among local officials. The prosecutor, a man whose ambitions were only matched by his greed, had struck a deal with the sheriff, both men eager to rid themselves of an inconvenient truth that threatened their power. Samuel learned that Jacob's supposed victim was involved in shady dealings, leading Samuel to suspect that his brother had become a scapegoat for something much larger than himself. As he dug deeper, Samuel encountered townsfolk reluctant to speak out against the sheriff or the judge. Fear gripped them like a vice. They understood that silence was their only protection against retribution. But Samuel could not let this continue. Each new piece of information fueled his resolve to expose the conspiracy. He recalled the night he and Jacob had shared tales of dreams and aspirations, and how quickly everything unraveled. With his brother's fate hanging in the balance, Samuel realized that he was not merely fighting for Jacob's name but also for every soul in Grey Hollow who had been wronged. The fight for justice would be long and perilous, but he would not rest until the truth was unveiled and those responsible were unmasked. Samuel's investigation brought him face to face with the formidable figure of Sheriff Wilkins, the very embodiment of corruption in Grey Hollow. The sheriff, a man of imposing stature and a smile that rarely reached his eyes, wielded his power like a weapon, manipulating those around him with a calculated ease. His influence extended into every corner of the town, from the jury box to the tavern where whispers of dissent were quickly silenced. As Samuel recalled encounters with townsfolk, he understood how deeply entrenched Wilkins was in the community's fear. The sheriff had an uncanny ability to turn friends against one another, planting seeds of doubt that festered until trust was all but obliterated. Witnesses who might have spoken out about Jacob's innocence were intimidated into silence, their lives threatened by the very man tasked with upholding justice. Each time Samuel sought information, he found himself up against an invisible wall erected by Wilkins' iron grip on power. The more Samuel pressed on this path, the clearer it became that the sheriff had orchestrated Jacob's downfall from the start. He had engineered evidence, manipulated testimonies, and even ensured that influential members of the jury carried out his will. It was a grim reminder that law and order could be twisted into tools of oppression when wielded by corrupt hands. Yet within this darkness lay Samuel's resolve. With each obstacle set by Wilkins, his determination solidified further. He would dismantle the web of deceit woven by the sheriff and expose his underhanded tactics. As he tracked down jurors one by one, he felt emboldened by memories of Jacob's laughter and dreams. The truth would not remain buried. It would rise like a phoenix from the ashes of despair, illuminating the extent of Wilkins' corruption and securing justice for all those who had suffered under his reign. Samuel vowed to shine a light on Grey Hollow's darkest corners until justice was restored and his brother's name cleared once and for all. As the weight of his brother's execution settled heavily on his shoulders, Samuel Deacon set about preparing for the daunting journey ahead. He understood that confronting the forces behind Jacob's wrongful conviction would require not just courage but meticulous planning. With his heart steeled by grief and a burning desire for justice, he gathered what little resources he could find. In the dim light of their home, Samuel rummaged through old boxes, locating a weathered map of Grey Hollow and its surroundings. He spread it out across the table, tracing his fingers over familiar landmarks: the tavern where townsfolk gathered to exchange news, the courthouse where dark decisions were made, and the sheriff's office which loomed like a dark sentinel over the town. Each mark on the map represented potential allies and adversaries in his quest. He secured supplies, a sturdy rope for climbing when needed, a small dagger hidden within his belt for self-defense, and notebooks to record every piece of evidence he uncovered. With each item he packed, Samuel felt his resolve harden. He was no longer merely mourning his brother but had transformed into an avenger devoted to unearthing the truth. Before departing, he sought out individuals who might hold valuable information, old friends of Jacob's or those who had once dared to challenge Sheriff Wilkins' authority. He made notes on whom to approach first and how best to persuade them to speak out against their fears. A sense of urgency propelled him. Time was of the essence if he hoped to dismantle the web of deceit before it ensnared anyone else. As dusk fell over Grey Hollow, Samuel mounted his horse and rode away from the remnants of his shattered life. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, yet it was also filled with possibilities, the promise of revealing truths long buried by corruption. With every mile traveled, he prepared himself not only for confrontation but for redemption, knowing that this quest might very well reshape not only his destiny but that of all those wronged in Grey Hollow. Samuel's first stop on his quest for justice led him to a rundown tavern on the outskirts of Grey Hollow, a place draped in shadows and whispered secrets. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and anxiety, the patrons casting wary glances as he entered. His target was one of the jurors from Jacob's trial, a man named Harold who had once been a close neighbor and friend. As Samuel approached, he could see the flickering fear behind Harold's eyes. The juror's face was drawn, the toll of guilt evident as they settled into a dim corner booth away from prying ears. Samuel leaned in closer, his voice steady yet urgent. "You owe it to Jacob to tell me the truth." Harold hesitated, nervously twisting the straw of his drink. "I didn't have a choice, Samuel," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were pressured, threatened by the sheriff and those connected to him. It wasn't just about the verdict, our families were at stake." The confession hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. He fought back against the rising tide of emotion that threatened to engulf him. "They forced you to vote guilty." Harold nodded, shame washing over his features. "We knew he was innocent, but when they hinted at losing everything, I thought about my children. There was no winning against Wilkins." Each word tumbled out, laced with regret, revealing how deeply fear had rooted itself in the community. Fueled by anger and desperation, Samuel pressed further, demanding details about the coercion and any connections to other jurors. As Harold spoke, Samuel scribbled notes furiously, each confession piecing together the tapestry of conspiracy that had wronged his brother. "Take heart," Samuel urged Harold as their conversation drew to a close. "Your courage to speak up will mean something." He knew this was only the beginning, but felt invigorated by the knowledge that even a small victory could tip the balance back toward justice. With new leads in hand, he set out into the night, ready to confront those who thought their deception was safe from exposure. Samuel was more determined than ever. He wouldn't stop until every lie crumbled under the weight of truth. With new information from Harold, Samuel set his sights on confronting the prosecutor, Daniel Graves, a slick lawyer with a reputation for securing convictions at any cost. Graves held court at the local law office, where the air was thick with cigar smoke and ambition hung like a mantle over the room. Samuel steeled himself as he pushed open the door, determined to unravel the web of deceit that had ensnared Jacob. As Samuel entered, Graves looked up with a calculated smile, exuding confidence that made Samuel's skin crawl. "What brings you here, Deacon? Shouldn't you be mourning your brother?" The comment oozed sarcasm, but Samuel was unfazed. "I'm here for the truth," Samuel stated firmly, his voice steady despite the tempest of anger brewing inside him. He could see the shift in Graves' demeanor, a flicker of unease hidden beneath his bravado. "I know about the deals you made with the sheriff. You played a part in framing my brother." Graves leaned back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "Framing? That's a serious accusation," he replied, though his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. "Your brother was convicted based on evidence and testimony. Don't try to twist that into something sinister." But Samuel pressed on, recounting Harold's confession about the coercion that had influenced the jury's decision. With each word, he watched Graves' mask slip just a bit more. "You knew Jacob was innocent, yet you pushed for his conviction to protect your own interests and those of your powerful friends." A tight smile formed on Graves' lips. "Listen, Deacon, the law is complex. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Your brother was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time." Samuel's heart raced, fueled by revulsion. This wasn't just about a wrongful conviction, it was about a corrupt system intent on maintaining its power. "You think I'll let this go? You're mistaken. I'll expose every deal, every lie, until the truth comes out and justice is served." As he turned to leave, Graves called after him, feigning a casual tone but laced with a threat. "Be careful, Samuel. Not everyone will appreciate your digging." Samuel stepped outside, resolve ignited further by the encounter. He realized that every revelation he uncovered would bring him closer not just to justice for Jacob, but to unmasking the entire corrupt system that plagued Grey Hollow. With renewed purpose, he moved forward into the night, ready to confront whoever stood in his way. With the weight of his brother's injustice heavy on his shoulders, Samuel Deacon marched toward the sheriff's office, determination burning in his chest. Sheriff Wilkins was the final piece of the puzzle, the man whose machinations had orchestrated Jacob's downfall. Samuel had gathered enough evidence and testimonies to confront him, but he knew this encounter would be fraught with tension and danger. As he pushed through the creaking door, the sheriff glanced up from his desk, surprise momentarily crossing his features before it was masked by a veneer of indifference. "What do you want, Deacon?" he asked, his voice cool and detached, as if they were merely discussing business. "I want answers," Samuel replied, his tone unwavering. He stepped closer, locking eyes with Wilkins, refusing to back down. You know what you did to Jacob. You framed him and used a corrupt system to cover your tracks. Wilkins leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with an air of casual arrogance. You're barking up the wrong tree, boy. The law is as it is. Your brother was guilty. That's why he was hanged. Guilty, you coerced the jury and manipulated evidence. Samuel shot back, anger fueling each word. What are you afraid of, that the truth might come out? The sheriff's demeanor shifted slightly. A flicker of concern crossed his face as Samuel pressed on. People are starting to talk about what really happened at that trial. I have witnesses willing to testify against you. Watch your tone, Wilkins warned, a hint of menace creeping into his voice. You don't know who you're dealing with. Samuel leaned in closer, his resolve unshakable. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, a coward hiding behind a badge. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment silence enveloped them, tension crackling like static electricity. Finally, the sheriff broke eye contact and sighed heavily. It's not that simple, he muttered, but Samuel caught the slightest tremor in his voice. Then make it simple, Samuel urged, gripping the edge of the sheriff's desk. Tell me where the corruption lies, and whom I need to expose to bring justice for Jacob. Wilkins stared at him for a long moment before shaking his head. You think you can take me down? You're just one man against a system that's been in place for years. Maybe, Samuel replied, stepping back and straightening up with renewed vigor. But every truth I uncover makes me stronger, and I won't stop until justice is served. With that declaration hanging between them, Samuel turned and walked out of the sheriff's office, feeling an unfamiliar sense of hope mixed with defiance. He understood that the road ahead would be perilous, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait for him as he continued his relentless quest for justice. Driven by a newfound purpose, Samuel Deacon turned his attention to gathering evidence that could prove his brother Jacob's innocence. He understood that in order to bring down the corrupt pillars of Gray Hollow, he needed a well-constructed case supported by undeniable facts. The oppressive courthouse had archives filled with records, and Samuel was determined to sift through them for any shred of proof that would help clear Jacob's name. Over the coming days, he spent hours in the dimly lit records room of the courthouse, poring over old case files, police reports, and witness statements. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through grimy windows as he flipped through pages that smelled of age and neglect. It was here that he found inconsistencies in the original testimony of witnesses, details that contradicted the narrative pushed forth by Sheriff Wilkins and Prosecutor Graves. One report caught his eye, a witness who had seen Jacob at a different location at the time of the murder. This crucial piece of evidence had been buried amid the push for a quick conviction. Samuel's heart raced as he wrote down every detail, knowing that this could be pivotal in unraveling the corruption behind his brother's trial. He sought out those who had been present during the trial but were too afraid to speak up. Finding a former bartender who had served drinks to jurors on the night before deliberations proved fruitful. The man expressed regret about how pressure from the sheriff had influenced their decisions and revealed conversations he'd overheard regarding discussions about ensuring Jacob's conviction. With each interview and every document reviewed, Samuel's belief in his brother's innocence solidified further. Piecing together these truths felt nearly euphoric. He could see a path emerging that led toward justice. But he knew he needed more. He needed all these pieces to fit together perfectly for when he finally confronted Wilkins and Graves. As Samuel gathered everything into a folder for easy access, he felt an electrifying blend of hope and urgency racing through him. He was no longer just a grieving brother. He was becoming an avenger armed with knowledge, ready to expose the depths of corruption that had cost his family so dearly. Every hour spent submerged in evidence brought him one step closer to a climactic showdown that would determine not just Jacob's legacy, but the very soul of Gray Hollow itself. With the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, Samuel Deacon stood at the edge of Gray Hollow, the sun sinking behind him like a final curtain opening on an inevitable conflict. The air was charged with tension as he prepared to confront the powerful figures who had conspired against his brother. In his heart, he felt a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through him as he made his way toward the courthouse, where Sheriff Wilkins and Prosecutor Graves awaited him. The courthouse loomed ominously before him, its stone facade a testament to the corruption that festered within. Samuel stepped inside, where he'd arranged for a public gathering to unveil the truth. The townsfolk had come, not just to watch, but to witness how far someone would go for justice. As Sheriff Wilkins took center stage, a mix of arrogance and disdain painted across his face. The mood shifted from anticipation to suspense. "You think you can challenge authority here?" he sneered, glancing at Samuel with disdain. "This doesn't involve you anymore." "I think it absolutely does involve me," Samuel retorted, stepping forward boldly. "You framed my brother and covered your tracks with lies and intimidation, but today the truth comes out." From behind him, a murmur rose from the crowd as Samuel unveiled witness statements and evidence that detailed the coercion and manipulation that had led to Jacob's wrongful conviction. The tension in the room thickened with each revelation, Graves shifting uncomfortably while Wilkins clenched his fists in anger. "Enough with these accusations," Graves exclaimed, trying to regain control as he addressed the crowd. "This is nothing but a charade orchestrated by one bitter man." But Samuel would not be deterred. "Bitter? No, I am here for justice, for my brother and for all of you who have suffered because of this corrupted system." His voice flowed with passion as it rang through the halls. The confrontation escalated as townsfolk began to voice their own grievances against Wilkins' regime, the threats against them, how their lives had been shaped by fear. Samuel's heart pounded as he realized that change was within reach. Those who once remained silent were now emboldened by his courage. Yet just when it seemed victory was near, Wilkins drew himself up, rage seeping through every word as he snarled, "You have no idea what you're invoking. This town will not welcome chaos." Samuel took a deep breath, staring into Wilkins' eyes. "If exposing your lies is chaos, then I will burn down this facade if that's what it takes for justice." Cries erupted from both sides, a clamor of support from those ready for change and poison-tipped threats from those eager to silence him forever. As tensions reached a boiling point, Samuel stood resolute. The showdown between truth and power had only just begun, setting in motion a battle that would define not only Jacob's legacy but also the future of Gray Hollow itself. As the dust settled from the confrontation in the courthouse, the reactions of the townsfolk echoed through Gray Hollow like a thunderclap. Some stood with Samuel, invigorated by his courage to confront corruption, their faces alight with hope and determination. They were tired of living under the oppressive thumb of Sheriff Wilkins and his cronies, and Samuel's bravery had ignited a spark within them. Whispers of solidarity began to ripple through the crowd as people exchanged glances filled with newfound resolve. Yet not everyone was ready to embrace change. Palpable tension hung in the air, underscored by an undercurrent of fear that had long gripped Gray Hollow. Many townsfolk were hesitant. They had seen what happened to those who dared speak out against the powers that be. A few looked on with skepticism, their faces shadowed by doubt and a lifetime of caution instilled by years of intimidation from Wilkins' regime. "Don't get involved," one elderly woman warned a younger man beside her, her voice trembling slightly. "You know what they do to troublemakers." Her words hung heavily in the air, serving as a grim reminder of the risks that lay ahead for anyone who dared challenge the status quo. Samuel noticed these fearful faces but refused to let despair take root in his heart. "We cannot let fear dictate our lives any longer," he shouted again, rallying those willing to listen. "If we stand together, we can dismantle this system. We owe it to Jacob and all those silenced before him." His impassioned plea resonated deeply with some, drawing them closer, yet others still hesitated, torn between loyalty to their longtime sheriff and their desire for justice. The town was at a crossroads. Samuel's quest had uncovered not only hidden truths but also revealed how deeply entrenched fear had become in their lives. As Samuel looked around at the gathering crowd, he understood that this was just the beginning. The path forward would be fraught with challenges. He needed to empower those willing to join him while also addressing the fears that held many back. This battle was not just for justice for Jacob, it was for the very soul of Gray Hollow itself. With determination etched on his face, Samuel vowed to keep pressing forward, knowing that every person he inspired would strengthen their cause against tyranny and corruption. He would show them that truth could triumph over fear if they were brave enough to stand united against injustice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Gray Hollow, Samuel Deacon prepared for the climactic showdown that would determine the town's fate. The gathered crowd buzzed with tension and anticipation, churning with a mix of hope and fear as Samuel stepped forward to lay bare the truth. With a steady voice, he addressed the townspeople, his eyes scanning their faces, their trust and doubt both palpable. I stand here not just for my brother Jacob, but for every soul who has suffered under the tyranny of Sheriff Wilkins and his corrupt cronies. He pulled out the carefully compiled evidence, holding it up like a beacon. This is the proof of their deception. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Samuel detailed the coercion faced by jurors, including Harold's confessions about threats made against him and others. With each revelation, he sensed a shift in energy. Courage began to replace fear among those watching. "Do you want to continue living under their oppression?" Samuel pressed, his voice rising above the murmurs. "We have the power to demand change. Know that their fear has kept you quiet for too long." In that moment, Sheriff Wilkins stepped forward, attempting to cut through Samuel's impassioned plea. "Enough of this nonsense. You're just stirring trouble where there is none. Everyone knows your claims are baseless." His arrogance masked a flicker of unease, a fear of losing control. But Samuel held firm, undeterred by the sheriff's bluster. "Your lies have been exposed for all to see. No longer will we allow fear to dictate our lives." He turned to address those still hesitant in the crowd. "Join us. Together we can dismantle this system that has stolen our voices." The weight of Samuel's words hung in the air like charged electricity. Several townsfolk stepped forward, emboldened by his courage. Yet even in this unity, a few voices of dissent rose up, reminding others of what they stood to lose. The wrath of the sheriff's power loomed large over their heads. As tensions reached a boiling point, Samuel felt adrenaline pumping through his veins. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a battle for Gray Hollow's very soul. The choice was clear: continue living in fear or stand united with him against corruption. A collective gasp escaped the crowd as Wilkins, his face contorted with rage, prepared to respond. "You'll pay dearly for this treachery." Samuel met his glare unflinchingly. "I'm ready to pay whatever price is necessary, for truth is worth fighting for." The moment was electric, poised between despair and hope as every eye turned toward Wilkins. What happens next would ignite either a new dawn for Gray Hollow or plunge them further into chaos. As both sides faced off, Samuel's heart raced. He understood that their fate rested on the precipice of this confrontation, one that would forever alter their lives and the essence of their town. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Samuel Deacon felt a mix of relief and sorrow as he surveyed the changes stirring in Gray Hollow. The townsfolk had begun to come together, emboldened by his fearless stand against Sheriff Wilkins and those who had sought to maintain their oppressive grip on power. As he walked through the streets, he was greeted by nods of respect and murmurs of support. It was a bittersweet recognition that came tinged with the heavy cost of his journey. While the immediate threat had been addressed, Samuel knew that true justice for Jacob and lasting change for Gray Hollow would require more than just one confrontation. He pondered how best to immortalize his brother's story, the story of an innocent man wrongfully accused, sacrificed at the altar of corruption. It was vital that the truth be recorded, not merely as a cautionary tale, but as a beacon of hope for future generations. With a sense of purpose knitting back into his heart, Samuel decided to document everything: the evidence he had gathered, the stories shared by reluctant witnesses, and his own reflections on the relentless quest for justice. He envisioned a narrative that would capture not only Jacob's innocence, but also shed light on the dark corners of Gray Hollow, the systemic injustices that had allowed fear to flourish unchecked. Yet he also wrestled with the moral implications of his pursuit. In seeking justice for Jacob, had he led others into danger? The thought weighed heavily on him, especially knowing that some townsfolk still clung to their loyalty to Wilkins out of fear. Samuel knew there would be consequences. Fighting against such entrenched power would not come without risks. As he settled down with pen and paper under an ancient oak tree, a silent witness to both tragedy and resilience, Samuel felt the stirring of determination within him. He would not let fear dictate this town's destiny any longer. Instead, through storytelling and remembrance, he could ignite a movement dedicated to truth and justice. "Jacob," he whispered softly to himself as he began to write, "your story will not fade away." With each word penned on the page, Samuel forged a legacy that would transcend his personal grief and become an anthem for all those who had suffered injustice in Gray Hollow. For in sharing this truth, Samuel hoped to inspire courage in others to rise against tyranny and ensure that history remembered both Jacob's name and the fight for justice long after they were gone. In the quiet moments that followed the tumultuous events, Samuel Deacon found himself under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree where he had penned his thoughts. As the cool breeze whispered through the leaves, he reflected on the meaning of justice and what it truly meant for Gray Hollow and its people. The fight against Sheriff Wilkins and his corrupt system had rendered a bittersweet victory. Although the truth had come to light, it required great sacrifice to achieve. Samuel recognized that justice isn't simply about retribution or punishment. It involves healing wounds, both personal and communal, and creating genuine change. He thought of those who had stood beside him, their bravery awakened by his resolve, yet also of the many who still harbored fear in their hearts. Their struggle was not just about Jacob's name, it was about reshaping their community into one where truth could thrive without fear of consequence. As he wrote down his thoughts, Samuel contemplated how to immortalize Jacob's legacy. He wanted future generations to understand what had transpired, why truth matters more than fear, and how easily justice can slip through one's fingers when left unprotected. He realized that words themselves could wield a transformative power, not just to retell a story but to inspire action and remembrance. However, doubt lingered at the edges of his mind. Had he truly changed anything in Gray Hollow? Would his fight resonate beyond mere whispers? Each name he gathered within his writings carried weight. Each testimony recounted captured another fragment of truth in a larger tapestry woven with courage. Samuel paused to listen to the sounds of the town around him. Children laughed in the distance, families began to gather with a sense of hope for brighter days ahead. In these moments of reflection, he understood that justice does not come without cost. It demands tenacity and sacrifice, but also fosters resilience and unity among those fighting for it. With renewed determination, Samuel vowed to finish his documentation, ensuring that every heartbreak and triumph would be chronicled intricately. The battles fought would echo across time so that both Jacob's story and the fight against oppression would remain evergreen, a testament to what it means to stand for truth in a world rife with corruption. Samuel understood now that justice was not an endpoint. It was an ongoing journey, one filled with complexities but essential for building a future worth inheriting. As he finished writing, wet ink held steady on parchment. It felt like hope waiting patiently for dawn's light.